In this week's video, I'm talking about the shadow. And the quote for this week is, "You have two wolves in you, a light wolf and a dark wolf. The one who wins is the one you feed." And also there's another quote that says, "Your only enemy is yourself." These are sayings that so many people would have heard and so many people believe because it's popular. The problem with our ego is that whatever the ego hears often, even if there is no evidence for it, it will believe it because the ego is neurotic. And this is why evidence is incredibly important on the road or on the path to enlightenment. Before I get into the video, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and do press the like button. It really helps. So talking about this light wolf and the dark wolf in us, okay, this comes from a shamanic psychotherapy or shamanic shadow work. The shadow is a part of us that we cannot get rid of. It is actually a part of what makes us human. Now, because the Western world denies that part of themselves and only pays attention to the persona, which is the accepted side of our personality, then the part of us that is called the shadow then becomes a little bit twisted and a little bit devious. Okay, we have a personal shadow, we also have a community shadow, we also have a cultural shadow, we also have a race shadow, and so the shadow is something quite interesting and complex that when we start to look at shadow work. Just like we have a culture, like, we say this is my culture, and we celebrate our culture, and there's parts of our culture that we are really proud of. So this becomes our cultural persona in a way. We can look at it like that. But then we have certain dark practices within our culture and our belief system. And we will see that as well within religion, how the religion has a front. They have got their religious front. Like if we look at the Catholic religion, for example, light of the world, and they are the savior of the world, but actually they've done the most and terrible things. So that's the shadow. The reason why we fall for these half-truths is because we want to, we're trying to move away from duality, but we're trying to move away from duality in a illusory way by denying the other side of life. Non-duality actually means to transcend duality, not to deny duality. When we deny duality, what we're doing is we're using the ego, and one of the operating systems of the ego is denial. It's actually a defense mechanism of the ego, is to deny something. Now, when we deny, we then use another defense, which is called projection. The people who deny their shadow, which is some of our more negative traits, then when we do that, we project our shadow onto somebody else or something else. Shamanism teaches us that we have to feed the shadow, okay? That we have to feed the dark wolf and the light wolf. There's no such thing as feeding the light wolf and starving the dark wolf, okay? We have to feed both. We have to, and this is what shadow integration is all about. We have to recognize the shadow and recognize all the good things in the shadow. By the way, let me tell you something. The shadow is the part of ourselves that holds our power. It is a part of ourselves that has all our talents. And so the shadow is not this negative entity. It only becomes negative when it's ignored and when it's not understood, okay? As little children, as we're becoming aware of ourselves, we start to behave in certain ways. Our families might not like certain things about us, so they cause us or make us suppress certain things because we might get beaten. And so or shamed or whatever. So in certain families, some things are celebrated in a child. In another family, that thing is disapproved of, and so that part of the child gets suppressed. It goes into what they call the shadow. Okay, and if those things are not addressed, if that part of the person isn't addressed, this is what causes maladaptation. Okay, also sometimes it's good things. There are good things about us that our family force us to suppress that also goes into the shadow. As we're growing up and we're getting older, we start to learn, or the ego starts to learn, what part of ourselves to hide and which part of ourselves we should showcase. The parts of ourselves we showcase, this becomes the persona, which is what they're calling the light wolf. And the part of ourselves that we suppress is the dark wolf. Okay, shadow integration is to go into that shadow element of ourselves, the hidden parts of ourselves, to see what is there, to work on the negatives, but also to tap into all of your talents that are in your shadow. Another thing is that until we face our shadow, we cannot ascend, we cannot do ascension work properly unless we know our shadows and we're confronted by our shadows. Okay, so in the Bible we saw Jesus confronting his shadow in the mountains, when Satan was saying to him, cast yourself down. If you are who you say you are, then cast yourself down. Okay, because it's written that if you are the Messiah, the angels will give charge over you lest you dash your foot against a stone. Would Jesus say to him, it is also written, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Now you will notice that you also face the same challenges. I need to just say here that Jesus showed us how to live. The life of Jesus was to show us how to live and what we will face. Okay, it's there for us to show us what the ascension path is really like and what we are also going to face. Okay, so we face this challenge as light workers when the shaitan in other people say to us, prove it to me. If you say that this spiritual realm is really there, then prove it. Or sometimes it's within our own self that even though we see so many things, so many things have happened, we've had so many revelation, and still we don't believe it. Our ego find it hard to believe. Our ego is asking always for more evidence.
So this sounds like a contradiction, so I need to clarify. As they say, the truth is paradoxical. So that's why many things sound like a contradiction. So earlier on, I said that the ego believes things without evidence when it's repeated many times. But then again, I've said that the ego is always asking for evidence. Okay, so we have something in us that's called the superego. And the superego is programmed through repetition, which is why after a while it will believe something even if there is no evidence to support it. However, there's another function of the ego that because the ego does not like anything, it doesn't know anything that disturbs its perceived or accepted reality. This is why it finds it hard to believe even when evidence is presented to it. So you may have a number of spiritual encounters, and you may even have it backed up by other things, and yet the ego will still say, I don't believe this. And that's because it doesn't want to change. Like when the individual doesn't want to change their lifestyle because there's going to be some negative consequences, or when the individual have to give up certain beliefs or practices that they are not ready to give up. The next part of this testing is the testing of hubris or egotism. So sometimes you'll be provoked into arguments to prove yourself, to prove your superiority by out-arguing somebody, or they will say to demonstrate your spiritual power. And this gets us into the trap of hubris, which is self-glorification.
Okay, so that's how we are mirroring Christ in the desert. Okay, another thing in the desert with Christ, it was his greed, not his greed. It's going to be our greed that we have to face. So Christ proved to us that even when he was fasting, okay, he still had power over his appetite. So whenever the shaitan said to him, well, why don't you turn this stone into bread? And he says, man must not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. It also tells you that you need studies. Okay, I'm trying to do this so calmly because there's so much to say. And this is one of my subjects that really I'm very passionate about. And I know that there is so much misguidance and misrepresentation because this Maya is in us. You know, the audiobook I selected to listen to last night, even that audiobook was saying that some people are initiated into the darkness. They're consciously working for the spirit of illusion. Some people are not. Some people are just caught up in it because they don't study and they just pass on information without actually processing it first and testing it. As the scripture says, you must test the spirit. So I'm trying to do this as calmly as I can, knowing that this can be very upsetting to so many people, and I don't want to upset anyone. And I know that it will be upsetting because I was upset in all of this. I had to come through a lot of dissonance myself, okay, and having to reprogram myself. So in Buddhism, they talk about Mara, the tempter, okay? So Mara represents the spirit of confusion and the temptation that we will undergo, all of us. Like I said, Christ came to show us what we will all go through on the ascension pathway. The Buddha's name is Siddhartha Gautama, okay? And prior to his enlightenment, he also met Mara, which is the spirit of illusion. Now, people just use different names for this spirit of illusion. Some will say Satan, some say devil, some say darkness, blah, blah, blah. So Mara is the name that they use. Mara means illusion. And it said that he was tempting Gautama with all kinds of flashy stuff and this different life and blah, 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 which is what Jesus was also tempted with. If you worship me, I'm going to give you the kingdom of the world. You know, I'm going to give you all of this if you just worship me, right? So many people who are light workers have fallen for this. So many people are, and they're actually trying to deter people from their path by telling people ignore the darkness, because if they tell people many things, but one of the things I heard this week was somebody say ignore the darkness because if you don't, then more darkness is going to come into your life. And you know, she's talking about people who came from 12th dimension and different dimensions to come here to actually help. And in her opinion, that they're, which is not just her opinion, she's just repeating somebody else's opinion, that they're actually making it worse because they're addressing the darkness, they're addressing the dark practices that are on the earth. And this woman on this video was saying that because they're adding judgment, and this is darkness. When you add judgment, it's like the illusion of it all is that if people had not used good judgment to say people should not be enslaved, all humans are equal, black people would still be slave, White people would still be slave. There's some white people were also slave, by the way. Slavery was not just about black people. Women would still be slave to men. Children, and children even now, children are still being bred for body parts. Children are being bred for trafficking. Children are being bred for so many different things. It's disgusting, and to make beauty products. But you have people who are supposed to be light workers who are convincing other light workers not to do their jobs. And it's like, to me, I'm like, what the heck is going on? So this week, this has been heavily on my mind, you know, and I found it, they talk about divine coincidences, because the audiobook that I found was actually talking about the very same thing, or the audiobook that found me, was talking about people who are initiates, who are working for the darkness. Zoroastrian religion talk about Ahura Mazda, which is the bounteous spirit, or the spirit of light, or the spirit of wisdom, or the spirit of illumination. And they also talk about Angra Mayu, which is the spirit of ignorance. They call this a bad spirit. These are just names, you know, like they call it a bad spirit, or spirit of chaos, or the spirit of destruction. Now, because these kinds of spirit is within the astral realm and it's impressing itself upon humans, this is why human being in our sleep, because we're sleeping, we're not fully cognizant, we're not fully awake, people are able to hypnotize us and cause human, or traumatize humans into doing negative practices, and saying that there is no evil in the world, there is only good. And therefore people who are naive will do these practices believing that there is no bad, there's nothing bad, it's just an experience. And I hope that I'm making sense. But that's because there are these forces that when we are not awakening properly, and we are not aligned properly, that we can become confused and convinced of doing things that are very evil. Now, another name for this Maya, or Mara, is also death and greed and envy. So and jealousy, and these kind of emotions that humans have, where they call this the human lower emotions that human have. All of these emotions are in the astral realm. So whenever we're practicing and we're meditating and we're on this ascension pathway, a lot of things that we never even had before can be activated, because it's within the astral realm. And that's why there is a caution around what you're practicing, who you're practicing with, what your belief systems are. And it will explain why so many people who started off well ends up down a road of doing quite disturbing practices. But it's not necessarily because the spirit in itself is evil. It's because of ourself and because of what's going on in us. So it's not like you can blame an evil spirit for it. It's very complicated, and it's very difficult to even try to explain it properly in a video like this. There are just forces in the ether. There are forces in the astral realm that if we are not evolving properly, they will impress upon us in a negative way and cause the human to act out negatively, or to become insane, or to do things that to some of us, we call these evil practices. We have to have some grounding, and we have to know what is good and what is bad practice. Also, another thing that will happen is that some people become discouraged because of the burden. There's so much fear and terror that consumes a person, and that also can lead a person into isolation, and to make the person feel overwhelmed and feel like they're not capable of fulfilling their mission here on this planet. We saw this kind of spirit manifesting in Cain and Abel, when Cain killed his brother out of envy and jealousy, as opposed to Cain doing his best, as he was warned, if you did your best, you would have been accepted. But instead of doing his best, Cain murdered his brother, so that he didn't have to witness his brother being accepted and his brother doing well. So he got rid of his brother, that's the spirit of murder. That's the spirit of envy, the spirit of jealousy that causes murder. And so many people are murdering their fellow light workers. When people cannot kill you physically, they will assassinate your character through slander or gossiping. In Islam, this is called cannibalism. They call it eating your brother's flesh. And as Christ said again, it was another warning, blessed are you when man shall persecute you and revile you and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely. For my sake rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. This is also another thing upon the path where you're going to be slandered when you haven't done anything, okay? And people will make shit up about you, basically. And that's because that spirit of Mara is using that person, and they don't realize that they're doing it. They become jealous and they become envious, and they make things up, and they cast their shadow onto the other person, and they slander the person and ruin their reputation. They're basically working for the spirit of darkness, stopping that person from illumination, or stopping that person from doing their mission. So this is why we all need to learn our shadow. We need to actually do shadow integration so that we are facing the negative aspects of ourselves, so we can clear it, so that we don't project it onto another person, and also so that we are using the good stuff. Our shadow is filled with beauty, actually. Our shadow is also a place where all our gifts are. I think I've said this already. If I haven't, I'm saying it again, because sometimes I get dizzy doing these videos and I forget what I've said. So our shadow is actually, the shadow realm is the shadow actually is also a place. I think I've said that before. It's not just an entity, it's also a dimension. It's wonderful. And we have so much gifts in there. Some things that your family and your friends have caused you to suppress because they were jealous of it or they didn't understand it. Some things that you have suppressed because you didn't understand it. Some things you may have misunderstood as being bad when it's actually good, and some things you misunderstood as good that actually bad, or not healthy. Basically, is what bad is not healthy for you or not healthy for the people around you. And so we have to then start to go within, and this is how we start to embrace our shadow. And we do this in therapy. We also do this in meditation. We can do this with our guides. And it's said we can do our ascension work alone, but it will take us multiple lifetimes to do this alone. Or we can do it with somebody else, or we can buy books as well. But know that we mustn't stick to any one school of thought, because any one school of thought only have a specific perspective. And so that's why there's so much contradiction or seeming contradiction. So you must go to multiple sources and face the dissonance that you're going to feel inside. It's very disturbing. And so so that you're able to clear some of these things. When we're feeling dissonance, when we're feeling this rage and this upset, and we feel like pulling away from people or isolating ourselves, or trashing people's reputation or damaging other people, this is this destructive force that's in us, that we don't know how to contain ourselves. We don't know how to contain the Maya within us, or Mara, or Satan, or the devil, as they call it, all these names, or Angramayu. We don't know how to contain these forces within us, so we try to spill it out onto somebody else. I hope that I have explained myself well enough. I am so dizzy, oh my goodness. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and do leave me a comment. Let me know what you think of this video, and until next time, love.